It's 7:30 in the evening across India. I am Tanvi Taneja. Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll bring you the day's big stories from across India and the world. My colleague Caroline Malone is joining me from Washington, D.C. Hello, Caroline.
Good morning, Tanvi. It's 9 a.m. here in Washington, D.C. and 3 in the afternoon across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, we hear about how Finland is closing its border with Russia again. First, the headlines.
White House pushes Israel to fight the Gaza conflict with precise targeting of Hamas rather than widespread bombing. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said this in his meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu. Hungary's Prime Minister warns he can still halt Ukraine's accession bid to the EU after membership talks won the bloc's approval on Thursday.
Hungary bear no responsibility for this. We can halt this process later on, and if needed, we will pull the brakes, and the ultimate decision will be made by Hungarian parliament.
Britain's Prince Harry calls for criminal investigation into Daily Mirror after winning the lawsuit against Mirror Group newspapers over allegations of phone hacking and other unlawful acts. Cold wave freezes most of China. 2 metro trains collide in Beijing under snowy conditions, injuring hundreds. Chinese President Xi Jinping calls for an all-out emergency response. It's day 2 of the crucial EU summit in Brussels, where Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has warned that he could still halt Ukraine's accession to the European Union a day after the bloc agreed to open membership talks with Kiev.
Hungary bears no responsibility for this. We can halt this process later on, and if needed, we will pull the brakes, and the ultimate decision will be made by the Hungarian parliament.
Orban failed to veto the launch of accession talks on Thursday. However, he did block European Union's $54 billion aid package for Ukraine. The EU will resume talks on the agreement early next year. Meanwhile, the bloc has granted candidate status to Georgia.
With great pride and great joy, I congratulate you on the historic decision. Georgia has become a candidate country for EU membership. Congratulations to all. I want to congratulate every citizen on today's historic day. This is truly a victory for our country and our people.
On the second day of the EU summit, Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas expressed optimism on the ongoing talks for financial support to Ukraine following the historic decision to initiate membership talks with the war-torn country.
Ukraine is struggling in the military side, then we should also provide them political support, and this is the political support to say that we move on with the processes and Ukraine's future is in Europe. As I said before, we will reach an agreement on the financial aid. There was a clear political will. It was just 3 o'clock already, and it was clear that we are not reaching the solution yesterday night.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin has said Ukraine's accession into the European Union is a remote prospect and could lead to destabilization of the EU. The Kremlin added that EU's initiatives to discuss accession are just an expression of political support for Kiev, and neither Ukraine nor Moldova match EU's strict criteria. The Israel-Hamas conflict is central to the agenda on day 2 of the ongoing EU summit in Brussels. EU leaders are divided over their response to the West Asian conflict. Earlier this week, majority of the 27 EU countries backed humanitarian ceasefire demands in a vote in the UN General Assembly. However, 8 members abstained, while 2 of them, Austria and the Czech Republic, voted against the resolution. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni engaged in a bilateral meeting with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen during the EU summit in Brussels on day 2. 2 months ago, Meloni had said that the international community must avoid an escalation in the conflict between Israel and Hamas and set a roadmap towards a two-state solution. Majority of EU countries support a UN call for a ceasefire, while the US, Israel's main ally, emphasizes on reducing civilian casualties. And now DD India's Alex Cadier joins us live from Brussels on the story. Alex, EU leaders have just wrapped up the 2-day summit. What can you tell us?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Just a few moments ago, Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, and Charles Michel, the President of the European Council, were joined by the Spanish Prime Minister. They walked through to go to their press conference, wrapping up this summit. There were concerns at the beginning that it was going to be a long, drawn-out, complicated affair, trying to negotiate with Hungary to unlock 2 things. One was opening those membership talks with Ukraine. The other was releasing those more than 50 billion euros in new aid for that country. On one of those 2 things, the EU leaders, at least 26 of them, feel they have succeeded. Ukraine will start membership talks. That will be a multi-year, long, detailed process of getting ready to join the European Union, adapting its economy, adapting the way it governs itself and adapting its laws as well. That is seen, at least by President Zelensky, as a victory for Ukraine. That was his reaction to that moment. Viktor Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister who had threatened to veto the decision, was not in the room, decided to leave the room when the decision was made and therefore abstained on that decision. On the other issue, the more than 50 billion euros in aid for Ukraine, well, that will be delayed but not stopped altogether. We heard the leaders rather optimistic about a deal being reached, just not today. They will come back here in January, hoping to strike a deal, particularly looking at that money for Ukraine. So in a matter of weeks, they say, that should be resolved. And finally, of course, the other big issue on the table, which was on the agenda today, was the situation in the Middle East, possibly looking at sanctions against Hamas, against the financing structures, the financial backers of Hamas, and possibly sanctions against Israeli settlers. Well, at the moment, the leaders had a discussion about it, but did not agree any changes. We know that there is mounting pressure within the EU to do more to put pressure on Israel, but at the moment, no formal decisions by the EU leaders on that point.
Okay. Alex, what has been the reaction to Hungary blocking this more than $50 billion aid for Ukraine?
Well, there was initial frustration, of course. There's been frustration when you have a situation where 26 member states agree with something and one is blocking, but that is the nature of the European Union. Decisions on foreign policy have to be made with the agreement of all member states. They say that is crucial. They also point out that 27 countries agreeing on anything and having a common position on anything is difficult enough. So the EU and EU officials describe this as a kind of constant negotiation machine. There was frustration by some EU leaders about Hungary's bloc, but also saying we can find a way to work through this, we can find a way to negotiate it. That's why they were a little bit more relaxed about that this morning, saying that it'll take a few weeks and they will come back for an unexpected emergency summit, you may want to call it, in January to make sure that that deal crosses the line.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. Alex Cadier reporting to us from Brussels. So, on to the unrest in West Asia, which also found a mention on day 2 of the EU summit. Washington is pushing Israel to focus the war in Gaza on precise targeting of Hamas leaders rather than widespread bombing. My colleague Caroline Malone is in Washington, D.C. She gives us more of this and other stories making headlines around the world. Caroline, White House continuing its intensive talks with Israel on the next phase of this war.
That's right. Well, it's now 70 days into the Israel-Hamas conflict, and the White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Isaac Herzog to discuss the ongoing situation. Well, the officials discussed how to secure the return of hostages held by Hamas and the continuation of humanitarian aid for civilians. In a media briefing after the meeting, Sullivan said the White House sees it's important for precise Israeli targeting of Hamas leaders and intelligence-driven operations in the next phase of the conflict.
The Israeli government has indicated that it does not have a long-term plan to occupy Gaza, and that ultimately the control of Gaza, the administration of Gaza, and the security of Gaza has to transition to the Palestinians. Now, the question of how that transition occurs, over what timetable, that is also something that we are having intensive discussions about. But the U.S. position on this is clear. We do not believe that it makes sense for Israel or is right for Israel to occupy Gaza. Israel has the intent to make sure that it is drawing those distinctions clearly and in a sustainable way, and we want to see the results match up to that. That's a conversation that I had in full with them today and yesterday as well.
Well, Sullivan also said that Israeli intelligence suggests Hamas is using civilians in Gaza as human shields, and the terror group wants to eliminate the existence of Israel.
On October 7th, you had a terrorist group, Hamas, come across the border from Gaza into Israel and massacre 1,200 people in a brutal and savage way. They then turned around and went back into Gaza and hid behind a civilian population, using civilians as human shields, using protected sites like hospitals and schools for military purposes, embedding themselves among the innocent Palestinian people, and continuing to fire rockets at Israeli cities, and continuing to go out on the airwaves and say, we're going to commit October 7th again and again and again, and go out and state, we're in a permanent state of war with Israel, and go out and state, we would like to see Israel's right to exist eliminated. So that is the reality that the IDF is contending with when it goes in.
Well, after meeting with Sullivan on Thursday, Prime Minister Netanyahu thanked the United States for its support and said that Israel will pursue its war against Hamas until absolute victory.
I greatly appreciate the US support for Israel in the supply of munition for the Israeli army, in blocking the attempts at the UN to stop the fighting, and in the assistance in returning our hostages. I would like to clarify, the return of our hostages is the main goal. We are not relenting in our efforts even for a moment. Even at this moment, I told our American friends, our heroic soldiers have not fallen in vain. Out of the deep pain of their having fallen, we are more determined than ever to continue fighting until Hamas is eliminated, until absolute victory.
Well, the White House National Security Advisor Sullivan is due to meet with the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah in the West Bank shortly. Well, they're expected to discuss the conflict in Gaza and potential longer-term plans. Well, senior US officials say that Sullivan will discuss ongoing efforts to revamp and revitalize the Palestinian Authority and rein in extremist settler violence against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. The Israeli military claims it has destroyed a Hamas command and control hub in Gaza's Shejaiya district and also conducted a targeted raid on militant infrastructure in Khan Yunis. The IDF released videos showing Israeli air and ground strikes on Hamas and also claims to have destroyed targets near the border between Gaza and Egypt. Well, Finland's interior minister will once again shut its border with Russia to stop the flow of asylum seekers. The new border closure will begin on Friday at 18 GMT and last for an entire month. Helsinki has accused Moscow of sending migrants to the crossings to retaliate against its decision to boost defense cooperation with the US, a charge the Kremlin denies.
Suomen itärajalla on välittömästi jatkunut.
We have been able to state that illegal entry at Finland's eastern border continued immediately. The number of migrants increased rapidly and the phenomenon accelerated faster than estimated. Several dozen people had already arrived in Finland through the Vaalimaa and Nairala border crossings during the morning. The government has today convened an extra meeting to decide on complete closure of the eastern border crossing. The closure starts tomorrow, Friday 15 December at 8 p.m. and ends on 14 January 2024.
Well, meanwhile, the Kremlin said a planned defense pact between Finland and the United States would lead to further tension between Helsinki and Moscow. The Kremlin added that Russia would regard the presence of NATO infrastructure near its border as a threat. Finland became NATO's newest member this year and is due to sign a defense cooperation statement with the United States on Monday. Well, DD India's Dasha Chernyshova reports from Moscow.
Finland has reopened its border with Russia but announced it would shut it down again. According to the Finnish authorities, the reason is that Finland wants to stop the inflow of asylum seekers who use the Russian territory. Helsinki accused Moscow of staging what it calls a hybrid operation on the border and arranging the migrants' inflow. 1,300-kilometer-long land border between the two countries has been shut down for over 2 weeks. Moscow denied Finland's accusations of orchestrating the asylum seekers' inflow in retaliation for the Nordic country's decision to increase its defense cooperation with the United States. On Friday, the Kremlin said Russia regrets the threat from Finland, with which it used to have excellent relations. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Helsinki's decision to sign a defense agreement with Washington will lead to increased tension between Russia and Finland. Peskov also said that NATO's military infrastructure in Finland will obviously pose a threat to Russia. Dasha Chernyshova reported in Moscow for DD India.
Well, there'll be a presidential election in the United States next year, with Democrat Joe Biden seeking re-election. He's likely to face former president and the likely Republican nominee, Donald Trump. However, Trump faces legal challenges related to his previous election actions. DD India's Nick Harper reports from Washington.
2024 is expected to be a dramatic year for US politics, but perhaps not this dramatic. The rise of AI images like these, of events that never happened, could make separating fact from fiction even harder during this election year. But one thing that's beyond doubt, Donald Trump's upcoming trials have not lessened support among his voters.
It doesn't matter that he's charged. It doesn't matter what courts seem to say. His base is with him. And that base won't go away unless he's convicted, and even then, if he's convicted, who knows? We don't know what will happen to his base.
The former president is facing 4 criminal trials this year. Charges include his alleged attempts to overturn the 2020 election results, which culminated in the January 6, 2021 attack on the US Capitol. Time in court will reduce time on the campaign trail, where he's vying to win the Republican Party nomination to challenge Joe Biden. State votes begin in mid-January, and polls already suggest Trump is comfortably ahead of the other Republican candidates.
There's probably a lot of discouragement among Trump's challengers. He's at 51%. Of course, that means half the people want somebody else, and so maybe somebody can rally some of these supporters, but that gets difficult here in the holiday season.
The state of the economy, jobs, immigration and abortion access are all expected to be key election issues. And the new battlefield in Gaza has created a political minefield for President Biden. The rising humanitarian crisis for Palestinians and Washington's unwavering support for Israel's military campaign has some progressive Democrats saying they can no longer support Biden. Josh Paul quit his job at the State Department in protest of the conflict and predicts it will hurt Biden at the ballot box.
I think it will cost them politically. I think there is a disconnect between where the majority of the American public are and where the administration is and where many in Congress are. And I think that these series of events have really crystallized that disconnect. That said, I don't know that it will lead to any change in the immediate term in terms of America's posture towards the provision of lethal arms to Israel.
Continued funding for Ukraine could also divide voters. Biden is pushing for billions of dollars in additional support, money many Republicans say should be spent at home rather than on a foreign conflict.
There's still a long while until November's presidential election, when a Biden-Trump rematch is expected. Before then, there'll be many months of partisan politics and courtroom drama. Nick Harper in Washington, reporting for DD India.
Well, with the US elections next year, candidates have ramped up their efforts to reach as many voters as possible. Democratic candidate Charmaine Daniels is running for office against Trump-backed Republican Representative Scott Perry in Pennsylvania and is relying on artificial intelligence to get votes. Ashley is the first artificial intelligence campaign volunteer who is calling voters on behalf of Daniels and is having customized one-on-one conversations around the key issues. Well, Britain's Prince Harry, who won a lawsuit against Mirror Group newspapers, has called for a criminal investigation into the Daily Mirror. Well, Prince Harry won the lawsuit with the UK High Court deciding he was the victim of extensive phone hacking.
The acts listed in this judgment are prime examples of what happens when the power of the press is abused. I respectfully call upon the authorities, the financial regulator, the stock market, who were deliberately deceived by Mirror Group, and indeed the Metropolitan Police and prosecuting authorities to do their duty for the British public and to investigate bringing charges against the company and those who have broken the law.
Well, that's it from me here in Washington. Back to you in the studio, Tanvi.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Caroline Malone joining us from Washington, D.C. You're watching DD India Global, still to come on the show. Oman's Sultan Haitham bin Tariq arrives in New Delhi on his first state visit to India. An Indian benchmark indices record run continues as the Sensex and the Nifty continue to hit fresh lifetime highs on Friday.
Wherever news breaks, whatever it takes.
Connecting corners, cutting across continents.
Stories that matter from across the globe.
Accurate, authentic journalism that serves you right. From politics to glamour, from sports to world affairs, with a fusion of aesthetics and substance. Introducing news in a new avatar. Experience the world through a new lens. Stay tuned to DD India for an exciting journey beyond borders.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I am Tanvi Taneja. Next news from India. Oman's Sultan Haitham bin Tariq arrived in the national capital, New Delhi, on his first state visit to India. He comes with a high-level delegation of senior ministers and officials. The Oman Sultan will hold bilateral discussions with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who will also host a luncheon in his honour. The visit will further reinforce the long-standing friendship and cooperation between India and Oman and strengthen bilateral ties between the two countries. The Indian stock market closed at an all-time high, setting new records as the indices experienced a massive rise. The Nifty breached the significant 21,400 mark, while the Sensex skyrocketed to an impressive 71,484. Markets are poised to maintain their upward trajectory, fueled by a dovish stance from the US Federal Reserve, hinting at a potential rate cut in 2024, coupled with a decrease in US bond yields and favorable domestic factors, including India's upgraded GDP forecast and lower global oil prices. Next, an interesting story. India has created the world's first portable emergency hospital. It's called Arogya Maitri Cube. This cube can be set up in just 10 minutes. In the event of a natural disaster, the hospital setup can be prepared on site. Take a look.
Have you ever thought that a cube resembling a matchbox with 72 rooms can become a hospital? Well, India has created the world's smallest and portable emergency hospital entirely using indigenous technology. This hospital, named Arogya Maitri Cube, is an enclosure with 36 square rooms. It is so compact that it can be lifted anywhere by air. In any emergency situation, it can be set up as a hospital within 10 to 15 minutes at any location. The hospital includes an ICU, OPD, operation theatre, beds, medicines, and food supplies. It can treat 200 people and accommodate 100 patients on beds for up to 48 hours.
दुनिया के सामने ये आरोग्य मैत्री लेकर आए हैं जिससे हम हेल्प प्रोवाइड करना चाहते हैं, ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा हम जानें बचाना चाहते हैं क्योंकि सबसे बड़ा हमारा मोटिव है एवरी लाइफ मैटर्स, हर एक जान बहुत कीमती है और हमारी ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा जानें शुरू के 1 घंटे में चली जाती है जिसे हम गोल्डन आवर बोलते हैं। होता क्या है कि अगर कुछ भी हुआ है, वॉर सिचुएशन है, नेचुरल डिज़ास्टर्स हैं, फ्लड है, अर्थक्वेक है, कोई रेलवे एक्सीडेंट हुआ है, कोई नॉर्मल रोड साइड एक्सीडेंट हुआ है, तो राइट टाइम पे पेशेंट हॉस्पिटल तक नहीं पहुंच पाता है। तो हमने क्या किया है कि हम हॉस्पिटल को ही पेशेंट तक पहुंचा दें।
The hospital contains equipment such as labs for testing, ventilators, X-ray machines, and ultrasound machines, everything found in a modern hospital. The hospital is designed for easy setup, allowing doctors or paramedical staff to prepare it. Under Prime Minister Modi's initiative, the Defence Ministry, in collaboration with the Health Ministry, has prepared this hospital at a cost of ₹2 crores. Under the Arogya Maitri initiative, India has also gifted similar hospitals to its neighbours, Sri Lanka and Myanmar. Nitendra Singh for DD India.
And now we take a look at other stories making news around the world. 2 train carriages on the Chongping line of the Beijing subway detached on Thursday, leaving passengers stranded and at least 30 people injured with broken bones. According to Beijing's metro and transportation authorities, the 2 subway train carriages broke due to a power failure caused by snow. A teenager from Britain who was found in southern France after disappearing 6 years ago is expected to return to his family in northern England. Alex Batty disappeared at the age of 11 during a holiday to Spain in the year 2017. Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for an all-out emergency response effort as cold wave has gripped China with temperatures falling below freezing points across most of the country and snowfall affecting transport. India's development cooperation with its neighbour Nepal continues under the Nepal-India Development Cooperation. Foundation stone was laid for the construction of the school building of Sri Janata Belaka Secondary School, Belaka Municipality in Udaipur district of Nepal. This school is being built with the Government of India's financial assistance at the cost of 3.8 crore Nepalese rupees under the Nepal-India Development Cooperation. And as we wind up this edition of DD India Global, let's take you to the streets of London where seasonal decorations are looking dazzling ahead of Christmas. Tourists and locals spilled through the streets of the British capital to do their holiday shopping as carolers in Trafalgar Square brought festive spirit to the city centre. So that's it in this edition of DD India Global. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram. You can also find us online at ddindia.co.in. We will be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I am Tanvi Taneja. From my entire team in New Delhi, thank you for watching. Namaskar.